Music's meaning is not universal. It doesn't communicate the same message or even emotion to every person in the world. In 2022, Margulis et al. Published an article in MTO called Intersubjectivity and Shared Dynamic Structure in Narrative Imaginings to Music. Narrative imaginings are one of my favorite things to hear about from other people. They're the stories that people create in their minds when listening to music. So a common one is that whenever people hear classical music nowadays, they tend to imagine a fancy party, as one of my professors likes to say. But back to the article, these researchers, Margulis et al., were interested in the types of stories that people come up with in their heads while listening to instrumental music, and then if there were any patterns or similarities between stories from different people and different cultures. To look into this, the researchers gathered participants from multiple geographic locations. We had Arkansas and Michigan in the US who had tons of exposure to Western media, and then an isolated Dong village in a rural part of China called Diamond, where participants had little to no exposure to Western media at all. They had these participants listen to excerpts of music that would have been familiar to at least one of the two cultural groups, and then the participants wrote down what they imagined in a free response form. So, for example, the researchers played part of Webern's string quartet Opus 28, which sounds a little like this. Interestingly, they found that people from similar cultural groups told similar stories. The US groups told stories about horror, murder, and paranoia. So the first quote they included was, "I imagined a murderer in a suburban house trying to find the inhabitant of the house while she was trying to hide from the murderer." And the second quote they included was, "I imagined someone in a horror movie when they sense that someone is in their house with them. There's a woman who hears something from another room in the house or sees a shadow in the corner of her eye, and she goes to look through the house for it." The researchers explained that it seems the US participants seem to focus on the atonality in this musical excerpt, which is something you'd commonly also hear in horror movie scores. The participants from Diamond, on the other hand, seemed less focused on atonality, but instead on the staccato articulations and big jumps from like high to low, which for them mapped onto scenes of playing with friends in childhood. "I play with my favorite friends at home and we go into the mountains very, very happily." Or, "I see kids in roller skates skating around happily." In a follow-up study, the researchers also explored whether these associations were recognizable to other people from the same culture. So a whole new set of participants from the same places performed a matching task where they listened to the same musical excerpts as before, but they didn't write anything down. Instead, what they had to do was identify which of two stories came from a previous participant. They were given a fake story and then a story from someone from the first study. When the participant performing the matching task was presented with a story written by a participant from the same culture as them, they did really well at identifying like which was the real story, but they did significantly worse when the stories were written by someone from a different culture. And after this, Margulis' lab performed an analysis called Term Frequency Inverse Document Frequency, TF-IDF, which basically means they looked at how frequently certain words appeared in narratives for each musical excerpt, and then they assigned a numerical score to represent that kind of frequency. And then they charted the scores in the figure here. It shows in physical like 2D space the similarity between each group, where the closer they are together in this like chart, the more similar they are. On the lower left of the picture, the Michigan and Arkansas groups were so similar that they're basically just one big interwoven blob, and then the Diamond groups are far away on the top right. So the article also goes into whether these narrative imaginings happen in real time while listening and how narrative events sync up with music structural events. But the main takeaway I wanted to share in this video is that musical meaning of a piece of music, or at least its interpretation, relies heavily on culture, meaning that musical meaning is not absolute or universal. That's a big reason why it's so important that there are many theories of music. Music theory as a field is trying to understand how people interact with and understand music. If different groups of people hear the same piece of music differently, then we need different theories that explain each of those ways of hearing. It's not just we need a different theory for every style of music. We also need a different theory for every possible way that people hear every style of music, and that's a lot of theories. Some larger theories or like areas in the field do include these types of smaller individualized theories within them, but there isn't a single book out there or area in the field that covers every single way of hearing. So So it's important to keep asking everyone around you what they're hearing and experiencing if you want to learn more about music. And this is why I keep saying that music theory can be a practice of empathy. Learning about other ways of hearing by learning about a theory of music can let you step into that way of hearing and appreciate another person's point of view. And it'll probably influence the way that you hear music too.